All right, going to be doing another New England Patriots 2025 NFL draft target. Basically doing a 2.0 almost version of Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from OSU. I'm going to put in air quotes 2.0 because I essentially had a 1.0 already. But heading into the Oregon game, I was already a big fan of Josh Simmons. I already had him graded as the 4th best left tackle in the draft, and I was holding off on finalizing that evaluation because I just really wanted to see how he held up against Oregon's front, which is, at the time, one of the most explosive defensive lines he'd face all year. So waiting for that game was going to tell me whether Simmons had upside to push in that same tier as Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks Jr. Unfortunately, that was the game he got injured in, and essentially that changed everything. Reports have been vague, and I haven't been able to find any confirmation on whether it was a partial or a complete patellar tear, or if surgery was even required. All we've heard is that he's expected to be ready for the start of the season, which suggests it might not have been a full rupture. But that uncertainty is a major concern. Still, if it turns out to be a partial tear with good healing, I think there's a real case for drafting him at the top of the second, depending on what a team needs and the medicals. There is some tape of him doing light football work already, so I think the reports of him being ready by camp is solid, meaning it wasn't likely a complete tear, which means a lot for this upcoming season and Josh's draft stock. Now, from a scouting standpoint, Simmons checks a lot of boxes. Naturally gifted mover at 6'5" at 315 pounds, light feet, strong core, decent technique, shows flashes of high-level hand usage, and when his base is locked in, he anchors well against power. The tools are clearly there, and with another year of NFL coaching, he has a legitimate starting potential, possibly high-end if the development curve continues. Now, what makes this severity of the injury so important for a team like the Patriots, who could use a long-term starter at left tackle? This comes down to risk tolerance. If it was a partial tear and he's trending towards a full recovery by camp, you could justify taking him early in the second or taking a shot with him in the back of the first trade-up scenario. But even then, risks will remain that will cloud Josh's valuation. Now, I'm going to cover some of that, and we'll discuss where the Patriots could target Josh based upon the value, plus what could be the game plan to get him up to speed. Now, just to be clear, this isn't medical advice. However, I'm attempting to take education, work experience as a physiologist to provide some insight about the type of injury and how collegiate staffs and professionals see these types of situations, from scouting, roster building, just managing the player health-wise too. I don't know anything about Josh's injury. I'm just going off my experience working with athletes coming back from patellar tendon injuries, also working on a staff attempting to manage an athlete coming in that had suffered a partially torn patella tendon. Again, I'm not providing medical advice. I don't know what happened with Josh. I'm not saying anything specific about his injury or his rehab schedule or anything physical about him. We're just talking theory, so we have an idea about evaluation. First thing is understanding just tendon injuries in the first place is big because, some people hear torn this and they think kind of similar to like an ACL, MCL injuries, or a muscle tear. Now, like muscle injuries, pulled, partially torn, thankfully, there's a lot of blood flow to those. It's a matter of time, obviously really working hard to get rehab back up, but it's doable. Now, even ACLs, MCLs, like in your knee or other ligament injuries, painful, require you to sit out for a while, but if the athlete was in good shape in the first place and you can have a really great surgery, look at Steph Diggs. The guy's, I'm not saying he's ready, but you can see him running around. He's doing crisp routes. It seems like he will be at least operative and being in shape as long as everything holds up. Maybe that guy really is ready for week one. Now, tendons are another thing. Those are pretty rough because not only is it a long rehab, you have to get the athlete back up to speed. You got to fix what really was the underlying cause if possible. But then the tendon healing is not 100%. It's not regeneration. Tendons do not regenerate the same way they were originally formed during development. Instead of true regeneration, the body heals producing scar tissue essentially, which will primarily be type 3 collagen, which is less organized, less dense, and ultimately weaker than the native type 1 that is found in healthy tendons. So even when it heals, it's never going to be the same tendon. Well, over time, some type 3 can be replaced with type 1. The alignment and the ultrastructure never fully replicates the original. In a native patellar tendon, collagen fibers are arranged in parallel bundles, providing high tensile strength. But after an injury, especially a full tear requiring surgical repair, the body produces disorganized collagen fibers. It's just trying to get something back together. Even under ideal rehab conditions, it's never going to be that nice parallel bundles that you see from native patellar tendons. Think of like original tendon fibers, kind of like 2x4, the grains in like a piece of lumber, right? Now, once damaged, you're essentially replacing them with particle board. That's what it is, right? So that's the problem. You have these nice, strong 2x4 lumber. It breaks, it splinters, and you have to replace that wood with particle board. Functional to extent, but not comparable in strength. The disorganization of the fibers disrupts mechanotransduction. So that's the ability of the tendon to transmit force, and they result in a permanent reduction in strength and performance. I'll say it again. A permanent reduction in strength and force from the tendon. So essentially, you can never fully get back. Even with really great surgery, it's always damaged in some way. Partial tears may retain some structural continuity and mechanotransduction, allowing for better functional outcomes, conservative management. The athlete should get back up playing. However, they too involve scar formation and collagen disorganization, albeit to a lesser degree. Now, there's other things you have to consider besides just how it wants to heal. It can take a while. Vascularization and nutrient delivery to a tendon's not great. Tendons are relatively avascular to begin with. So surgical trauma further compromises their blood supply. Now, you can do neovascularization to help support healing, but it often leads to excess fibroblast activity, so overproduces scar tissue. So you can let the body do it. It takes forever because low blood supply, but if you want to pump up some blood supply, and you're going to get more scar tissue. So this leaves the tendon repair to hypovascular and a hypocellular situation. And this is an issue if you have a full thickness tear. But again, even partial tears, vascularity might not be as compromised, and remodeling can proceed more efficiently, though, again, the same biological limitations will apply. It's not, you're still going to have some issues. But things repair. However, the native biomechanical properties essentially never come back. Even 1 to 2 years post-surgery, studies show that tendons, especially following full thickness tears, display reduced load to failure and stiffness. So their viscoelastic properties, which is the ability to store and release energy, their structural elements, and the structural elements at the bone insertions remain compromised. So muscles surrounding the knee may regain strength, but the tendon itself rarely transmits the same amount of force it does pre-injury. So you can build the muscles up, which is important, but what actually transfers the force into the bone, which then moves the body, is the tendon. And essentially, it's going to be hard for that to ever really get back to 100%. Partial tears, even when managed well, may show better retention of biomechanical function. However, the risk of chronic tendinopathy remains very high if the collagen realignment is not effective and simulated during rehab. So you're requiring a very dedicated rehab patient to be there, and a lot of monitoring to make sure it's coming back the way you want it to. You have to do regular diagnostics to see if the rehab's going well. Now, there's also the issue of neuromuscular and proprioceptive deficits. The original structure contains embedded Golgi tendon organs and mechanoreceptors, which play a crucial role in proprioception and neuromuscular control. Now, after a full tear and surgical repair, those are seldom fully restored, altering the proprioceptive feedback loop. This is an issue because this leads to reduced joint stabilization during high-stress activities like cutting, jumping, deceleration, absorbing force. Partial tears can also affect proprioception, but allowing for more complete sensory recovery with targeted rehab. But again, you have to be a committed patient. So, patellar tendon injuries are serious. Outcomes, even repaired patellar tendons, post or partial, you're talking structurally weaker, less elastic, less proprioceptively tuned, more prone to re-injury, and possibly chronic tendinopathy. And let me point this out, it heals biologically, but never biomechanically the same. In best case scenarios, surgically repaired patellar tendon may regain 70-90% of its original tensile strength. Full restoration, 100%, is virtually unattainable just due to intrinsic biological limits. You can try all you want, but essentially, like I talked about that piece of wood, once you break a 2x4, I mean, yeah, you can patch it up and you can do whatever you want, but everybody knows that's not 100% what it was when it was first put in. And this takes time. Even if you were to like do a good solid surgery and things are progressing well, I mean, tendon recovery timeline, like a best case scenario, depending, obviously, this is how bad of a tear was it? Full, partial, I mean, you're still looking at 12 months plus, and you're not even getting full tendon strength back basically ever. Now you can, best case scenario, things are just starting to look solid. The player is running around and doing things, and you can't tell they had an injury, but that doesn't mean it's still 100%, because it really never be. And it takes time. Like those first 6 weeks, I mean, you're lucky to get 10% tendon strength back, but that's inflammatory phase. I mean, they're just starting that type 3 collagen forms, get that scarring. I mean, and then after that, the next 6 weeks, maybe you're getting up to 10 to 30%. The fibers are still disorganized, still very fragile. I mean, we're talking 3 months post-surgery, still a very fragile patella. 6 months out, you're lucky to get 60% tendon strength. But that's when remodeling begins, some transition to type 1, so you can get a better idea of how it's really healing up. 9 months, again, kind of looking like it's 60 to almost 80%, but that's when you get better load tolerances, not full structure or elasticity, but you're getting an idea, and the athlete can start doing some stuff. You can start testing the athlete out, see, kind of project their return to play timeline. And like 9 to 12 months, 80-90%, and even at 12 months plus, recovery starts to plateau. And again, tendon will remain inferior to the native tissue. It's nothing about what the athlete could do rehab-wise or surgery. It's just internal biology, that what gets replaced is not as good of what was originally there. That 12 months plus, you're still seeing like full tendon integrity, fiber alignment, elasticity, and neurosensory function is not 100% restored. That last 10% is rarely recoverable. And it's not due to lack of effort, but just human biology itself. It's very difficult. You could probably get the athlete producing similar numbers in the strength and conditioning facilities. They might even look just as good as they were out in the field. We just know that deep down under that, the tendon is just never going to be 100. And that's okay. There is possibility you can reduce the risk of re-injury. Of course, absolutely. Now, of course, while a full thickness repaired tendon won't return to its original capacity, like we've talked about, building a resilient kinetic chain can significantly reduce that re-injury risk. This is the cornerstone of modern return to sport protocols. Whether it's full or partial tears, you can get them back up and running. But it's really how you can offload the patellar tendon. Now, the first thing, strengthening quads, especially the VMO, vastus medialis. That's that like teardrop muscle just above the knee on the inside of your thigh. You can get that little muscle that sticks out a little bit. That's your VMO. That one's big. That's big for just athleticism in general. So thankfully, as you're strengthening the quad muscles, you're doing some rehab, but you're getting the athlete back up and running, and hopefully even stronger. This reduces the load on the tendon during squatting and like jumping. So obviously that's going to be important for offensive linemen. VMO activation should improve patellar tracking and knee stability. Of course, you have to build a posterior chain power as well for an athlete or somebody coming back from an injury. So that's your glutes, your hamstrings, lower back. That's your primary three. Some people throw calves in there too. In this case, for somebody coming off patella, that's going to be big, because you're going to want that to absorb as much force on deceleration and landing. It's important. Everything basically from your rib cage on down needs to be balanced, pliable, can absorb. You can do some RDLs, glute bridges, Nordic hamstring curls. Those are all those are really great. But it's not just the thigh. You can't just do the immediate proximal muscles around the knee. Big one for just ACLs and MCLs and anything to go with the knee too is improving your hip and core stability. Weak hips / core, because most people just think of core, they think of like you're just there, abdominals, right? But it's everything, and that's the whole area, front and back. So weak hips and core lead to poor knee mechanics. Again, like when you plant your foot on the ground, what stabilizes the knee is actually your glute muscles up in your hip, right? Because that's stabilizing the thigh, which makes the top part of the knee. That's like wobbling around, you're going to get instability. So glute, core all need to be jacked up. And the other things you can do, like for patellar tendon, you get progressive tendon loading. So using like isometrics and eccentrics. Isometrics, like doing like wall sits, or like an eccentric, which is like a lowering part of an exercise. Slow squats. Now, what's good about this is it can help stimulate collagen alignment and stress tolerance. And you can use, again, like decline squats, wall sits. You can do there's some other like advanced stuff like blood flow restriction, but that has to be supervised. Don't do that yourself. But so there's things you can do. You can enhance ankle mobility and dorsiflexion. That's a huge one. You can speculate that might have been the issue here, because poor dorsiflexion increases the strain on the patellar tendon, which dorsiflexion is your ability for your toe to come up towards your shin. Now, if you think about that, is you're absorbing force, or you're just in your stance in general, like these are things that you're going to want to measure as coaches, because you're trying to see if the guy can actually like functionally be in these positions without being compromised. So again, poor dorsiflexion increases the strain on the patellar tendon. So if you have tight ankles, it's going to make its way up to the knee. So you got to address mobility limitations and targeted mobility work, and obviously calf strength too. And you should be also working on proprioception and motor control, balance drills, single leg stability, and controlled plyometrics, which can help retrain neuromuscular reflexes, restoring joint positioning, and reaction control. Those things, I think, for the athlete are kind of the worst part, which is you get back to it and you just don't feel like you're in control. You don't feel like everything wants to activate, and simple things like just standing on one leg and doing some like basic dumbbell overhead shoulder presses can be frustratingly difficult to do when you're coming back from a major injury. It can be a tough time for the athlete. But keep reminding them, a repaired tendon might not ever get to 100, but you can build a system around it, and it's stronger, more stable, and in many ways more efficient, right? The whole system can be stronger. So many athletes can come back smarter, biomechanically improved through a thorough rehab. There will always still be the risk of re-injury. And this is really the primary concern probably when we're talking about Simmons here. While successful return to play after patellar tendon injuries again is possible, the re-injury rates remain a critical concern, especially in high-level athletes like linemen, whose position demands high-velocity deceleration, force absorption, and explosive power through the knees. There's no way you can get around it. Like, it's going to have to absorb a lot of force and help produce force. Now, I don't suspect it was a full thickness patellar tendon rupture, but those have a documented re-injury or at least complication rate of 11 to 25%. So that's depending on surgical techniques, the rehab compliance, and obviously the tissue quality. So case by case basis, but it's high. Now, in elite athletes, only 50-60% return to pre-injury levels. That's understandable. This is full repair. But even if you do return, you're probably going to have chronic anterior knee pain. There's going to be some persistent weaknesses, lower power metrics on force plates. Now, partial tears, obviously less catastrophic, but there's still a 15 to 20% chance of progression to full rupture if not managed properly. I'll say that again. If it's not managed properly, a partial can progress to a full 15 to 20%. Of course, chronic tendinopathy, flare-ups are common. Now, if mechanical loading is not restructured properly post-rehab, that chance of progression is always kind of lingering. It's a long way, guys. It's a rough one to deal with as an athlete. You're going to be managing him as an athlete and as a patient, essentially his whole entire career. And that's okay. I mean, that's what you're doing when you're playing with these athletes, even at lower levels in college. An athlete comes back from an injury, you're dealing with them, that injury, the rest of their career. But you're looking at like 1 10-year follow-up study on patellar tendon repairs in the NFL, noted significant asymmetries in tendon stiffness. So what's the problem with that? Well, once you get tendon stiffness, it's not 100%, which can contribute to compensatory injuries. What does that mean? Contralateral ACL strains, hip impingement syndromes, which, one could say, hey, this is 10-year follow-up on an NFL study. I mean, of course, the guys who are playing in NFL, they're going to be beat up anyway. But injuries like this can definitely lead to not only other injuries, but just chronic wear and tear injuries, strains, hip impingements, chronic pain. But if you reduce the risk of re-injury, maybe the athlete gets through a decade of playing in the NFL. Yeah, it's going to hurt probably here and there. It's going to be manageable, but you don't want to rush return to competition. Got to make sure that the athlete's posterior chain is ready to go. It's got an eccentric capacity, so absorbing force, and make sure that rate of force development is getting close. Obviously, that's crucial for metric for offensive linemen. And if you get through that, you're making sure the inflammatory responses don't cause inhibition. Neuroinhibition is pretty bad. I mean, any athlete that's coming back from any major injury, you're just trying to limit the amount of inflammation, which, again, talked about this with Juju. Neuromuscular inhibition is pretty bad. The body's natural inflammatory responses can be a big hurdle in itself. You get chronic patellar tendonitis, that can be insertional tendinopathy, where that quadricep muscle is going to be inhibited. You can get some secondary breakdown of the tendon, have to worry about the graft site. It's a long road. And obviously there's also the mental component. There's the quote-unquote confidence gap. Athletes not playing hard. There's hesitation, subconsciously guarding the repaired side, leading to poor movement mechanics, bad technique, which you get compensatory injuries, right? In this case, you get bad, hip injury, spine, contralateral knee. Takes a beating as well. So athlete needs to, in order to reduce the risk, you got objective testing, got to monitor the stiffness. They can use a myotin pro to observe it. Ultrasound elastography is another one. That's a good readiness metric. Actually, I'm sure that's definitely what both of those are going to be involved. But going to maintain long-term eccentric training. Again, those Nordic hamstring curls, tempo RDLs, slow eccentric squats. Those are almost always going to have to be in his training program, just to make sure you're never working away from it, because that you're still trying to squeeze that 0.1% recovery years out from the injury. You're always working to try to build it up, strengthen it, and make sure that there's nothing around it that's weak or stiff. Doing your best. And you're going to need to do deload blocks too. You can't just go straight. You're going to have to put periodized unloading phases built in around the tendon load tolerance. You have the athlete track and the rehab track. Now you want the athlete to get ready. Well, that athlete track is dictated by what's going on the rehab track. So you have to give it time. Nothing gets repaired while you're working on it. You have to rest too. That's when the actual remodeling happens, sleeping, resting. It doesn't happen in the moment of training or rehab. So in order for you to even do that, not just like day to day, in the grand scheme of the rehab, there has to be off-season deloading blocks to give it a lot of time for growth and repair. And that stuff has to be monitored constantly. You might have like a really nice set protocol for the next 6, 12, 18 months, but you got to be monitoring. Any increase in post-activity tendon soreness should immediately trigger a regression in training volume or intensity, which people see as a setback, but maybe you went a little too fast. So a strategic return to play plan is essential. especially given the size, position demands, and long-term potential for players like Simmons. There's some strategic wisdom in delaying his return to 2025 or even redshirting year one. And this isn't just about healing the tendon, it's about rebuilding and bulletproofing the kinetic chain, refining movement, and preparing for explosive demands in the NFL. Now, a target return would be preseason 2026. So, full recovery plus a ramp up. So phase 1 would be 6 weeks. So that'd be late November of last year, early December, depending on if, again, not really know if there was any surgery or anything done with it, but that first 6 weeks, just getting quad activation, passive range of motion to 90 degrees as fast as possible, seated blood flow restriction, glute bridges, hip abduction, really basic, really easy stuff. Core activation, and then just edema control and patellar mobilizations. Now going into basically mid-January, that phase 2, trying to get a normalized gait. People call them Spanish squats. You can do wall sits, like we were talking about before. Really short step ups, maybe throw in some split squats, really hip dominant RDLs, banded glute work, core anti-rotation exercises. So really good ones, a pal-off press. Those are great. Just trying to get the body to be able to control itself. And proprioceptive work is obviously king right there, throwing in balance. And then working up to say, now you're really looking for structural rebuild. So actually building up the body. Maybe we could start seeing him doing some front squats, those trap bar deadlifts that they like to do now. Glute ham raises, maybe. Again, Nordic eccentrics are huge probably for him. He doesn't exactly have a very robust posterior chain. You can see there's no hanging hamstrings there for him. Loaded isometric holds. You can probably try some sled drags. Resisted marches would be big for him. And then just core bracing with load. And then once you get to middle of this year, so around July, you can maybe start throwing some explosive movements in there. So trap bar jumps and the cleans, those are always big. Starting to really work on deceleration mechanics. Maybe throw some single leg landings in there. Starting to build up those pass protection. You can throw that in there. Those are options. Leverage drills are thrown in there. Broad jumps can be in there for him. Plyometrics finally starting to come in. And this is stuff we're talking July, right? And then NFL movement integration is at that 9 to 12 month period. That's phase 5. That's high speed change in direction. That's pass sets with anchor drills, VBT squats, force plate data, trying to get that, seeing if that's working, trying to really make sure that this guy's ready to go. And then game speed simulations. So what that means is, hey, once we get to August, he might be walking around camp looking pretty good. You can see him out there. He's obviously not doing any impact drills, but he's doing his pass sets. He's doing anchor drills. You start to see some hey, that looks like football. So that could be optimistic. Now that could be where, but that's right at that point, that's where you start to get the separation sometimes. Hey, how bad was the injury? How's the rehab going? Because you can start taking, hey, this could be a mid-October, November type of timeline where all the diagnostics and rehab point to he's ready to go. Then there's a reintroduction to full contact. Possibly some controlled one-on-one reps. Finally, possibly considering max effort blocking under supervision. Maybe even full practice integration. So you could possibly see football in October, November. But that can also be extended out to March. That does give you the idea that it's possible, depending on how severe the injury was, November, December, talking basically Cole Strange-esque. So one would say, hey, it's a matter of time. Everything goes well. Maybe in 6 months to a year, he's 100% ready to go. You got yourself a potential starting left tackle 4, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 more years. But you need to do some red flag inspections. Now, besides just checking out the injury and his strength and his rehab, you need to do some structural inspections. First one, femur to tibia length ratio. The femur to tibia length ratio affects knee mechanics and, most importantly, patellar tendon loading. Now, what is a femur to tibia ratio? It's the difference between the length of your femur versus your tibia. So your thigh bone to your shin bones. So a higher ratio, so greater than 1. Typically, you want a 1-to-1 ratio around that, which is not perfect for everybody, but 1-to-1 is pretty good. Meaning the length of your tibia, your shin, is just the same length approximately to your femur. Now, a higher ratio, meaning your femur is longer than your tibia, so your thigh is being much longer than your shin, often leads to greater patellar tendon strain, especially during squatting or landing. Now, a lower ratio, so less than 0.95, can reduce anterior knee stress, but may increase posterior chain demand. What we don't want is somebody to have a longer femur, the tibia. An athlete with a femur length of, say, 47 centimeters and a tibia length of 44 would give you a ratio of 1.07, which means you're placing more torque across the patellar tendon under flexion. Now think about that. If your femur is roughly 3 centimeters longer than your tibia, not that much, there is a higher likelihood of patellar tendon injury. Where in contrast, a ratio closer to like 0.95 to 0.98 produce much favorable joint angles and force absorption versus tendon strain. So that's something they could measure to figure out. Maybe they already did that in the medicals, not really sure. But that's something you can identify during intake to determine, what's the likelihood of having it, or if there's, in this case, a re-injury. But honestly, this all really comes down to, was it a partial tear or a full rupture? Now, I think you can justify drafting him in the late first or early second as a premium asset with short-term limits, but a high ceiling if it's a partial tear. I'm starting to think that's what it is. He has been moving around already, so I was assuming, unless they're doing something really aggressive in terms of rehab and rolling the dice on a full rupture, I think it's leaning towards it being a partial tear. Now, if it's a full rupture, drafting him in the second round would be probably more of a full redshirt year, banking on 2026 performance for a long-term return on investment. That's the thing. Now, round 2, there's value for both the partial and the full. So that's where I think you'd have to target him. So at least the Patriots already have a left tackle to stopgap for a little bit with Vidarian Lowe. But then you're building towards a 2026 contention with him. And that's not bad. I mean, drafting a first-round left tackle talent with a repaired patella tendon in round 2 is a calculated but a high upside bet. It's going to rely heavily on his medicals, but also considering that the risk of re-injury in the first year is very high, and the underlying causes for the injury are probably still a factor. So I'm personally going with the second-round scenario, regardless if it's a full or partial tear. That's getting him in the second round is probably the only option, I think, for the Patriots. Because, at best, you're starting him off on PUP for the first month, and maybe start easing him in if everything is perfect. And I mean perfect. But someone else that has a decent left tackle might take a chance on him. Plus, by the way, just so you know, Simmons was a right tackle at first at San Jose State. So maybe that's an option for somebody else where they're willing to do that. Maybe putting him on the right side at first is probably the best move for him. Perhaps it might be the best idea if the Patriots get a shot at Abdul or Travis Hunter, or if they consider Graham or Carter or Warren or Ginty, somebody else, a Marion Hampton trade back scenario. That's honestly only if Campbell, Banks, Ursary, Connerly, and Membu are off the board. And the Patriots have to start scrambling for Simmons, or maybe go after Donovan Jackson. Just a reminder, on average since 2005, 5 tackles have been taken in the first round, with typically 3 taken in the top 15. So grabbing one of the projected 2 or 3 tackles in the back half of the first is probably going to be expensive in terms of capital, and you're getting a prospect with question marks. Admittedly, none of my scenarios sound great, I get that, but thankfully the Patriots can still benefit from an edge or wide receiver or several other options that allow them to be flexible around picking around Josh Simmons. So what do you guys think? Do you think the Patriots should go after Josh Simmons? Where should they get him? Do you think they should redshirt him for a first year? Let me know in the comment section below if you guys like this content. Please like and subscribe. As always, thanks for watching.